He remembered the scream first, not a loud one, not shrill like in the movies. It was short, cut off halfway, as if whoever made it had changed their mind halfway through. That was the first thing Marcus told the officers. He sat across from them in his small apartment, the rain tapping faint rhythms on the window behind him. The city was still awake outside, but inside, everything felt still. He cradled his tea, untouched, going cold in his hands. He was shivering, but not from the weather. He had seen it happen. He was sure. It was around 9:20, maybe a few minutes earlier. He'd just returned from a long shift, working late again. The lights in his building's hallway were flickering like always. That was normal. The chill in the elevator, normal too. What wasn't normal was what he saw when he looked out the window while microwaving leftover curry. Two men, standing near the corner of 7th and Maple. He didn't think much of it at first. People stood there all the time, waiting for an Uber, lighting a cigarette, talking on the phone. But something in their posture caught his attention. One leaned forward. The other stepped back, then forward again. A hand raised, a glint of metal. Then the scream. He dropped his fork, pressed his face to the glass, tried to squint through the raindrops, distorting everything. One man ran. The other. He stumbled, then collapsed against the lamppost. Marcus was already on the phone, already describing the scene, already doing what he thought was right. By the time the police showed up, there was no one there. But Marcus remembered it all. When the officers returned a few days later, he thought they were coming to thank him, or maybe to follow up, ask for a better description. Instead, they brought something else. Confusion. "Are you sure about what you saw?" one of them asked gently. Marcus frowned. "Of course I'm sure. I wrote it all down." "Did you notice a camera across the street? On the liquor store awning?" He hadn't. They showed him the footage. Two men. Same time, same corner. But no struggle, no knife, no blood. Just a quiet conversation. One man smiled. The other nodded. They shook hands, then walked away in opposite directions. No scream, no attack, no crime. He watched the footage 3 times. "Could it have been the wrong night?" he asked. They shook their heads. "Timestamp checks out. Weather too." Marcus sat back, felt his spine press into the chair like gravity had just remembered him. His mouth was dry. He didn't know what to say. He knew what he saw, didn't he? That night, he didn't sleep. The microwave beeped, but he didn't get up. The rain was heavier than before, or maybe it just felt heavier. He tried to remember, rewind the moment in his mind. 2 men, one in a hoodie. Something metallic. The scream. Had it really sounded like a scream? Or just a honk from a passing car? Had the man really fallen? Or did Marcus just assume he would after seeing something shiny? He couldn't tell anymore. It was as if someone had taken the memory, peeled back the edges and whispered, "Are you sure this was ever real?" The human memory isn't a recording device. It's not a video reel you can rewind with perfect accuracy. It's a story engine, a meaning maker. It edits, it compresses, it dramatizes, and sometimes it creates entire moments that never existed. Psychologists call this false memory, the phenomenon of recalling events with vivid emotional detail, even when those events never occurred. One of the most studied cases came from Elizabeth Loftus, who showed that with a little suggestion, you could convince people they'd been lost in a mall as a child. Not only would they believe it, they'd add details, the color of their shirt, the panic they felt, even who found them. Memories, especially the traumatic or emotional ones, are fragile. They degrade every time we revisit them. And when we fill in the gaps, the brain doesn't signal that those bits were invented. It simply merges them in. Over time, the story becomes the truth. Marcus didn't lie, but his brain did. And that's the most unnerving part of all, that the betrayal didn't come from someone outside. It came from within. He stopped talking about that night. Didn't bring it up at work. Told his sister he was mistaken, that the police had it sorted. He never watched the footage again. But every so often, when he stood at the window microwaving leftovers, he'd look down at the corner. And part of him would still remember it, the scream, the glint, the collapse. Part of him believed it happened. Maybe it did, in his mind. And sometimes that's all it takes for a story to become a scar. We trust our memories because we live inside them. They're the anchors of our identity. But when the anchor slips, we don't notice the drift. Your brain isn't lying to hurt you. It's lying to protect your narrative, to complete the picture, to make the chaos feel coherent. And sometimes, what it creates is more compelling than the truth, but never more real. Of course, memory isn't the only way the mind deceives us. Sometimes, it isn't what we recall, but what we believe, what we feel sure of, even when we're wrong. Maya was always sure of herself. That's what made her dangerous. Maya never raised her voice. She didn't need to. People listened anyway. There was something in the way she spoke, as if every word had been tested before it left her mouth. Not rehearsed, just assured. She didn't fumble. She didn't hesitate, even when she was wrong. It started with the capital of New Zealand. Sydney, she said. Wrong, of course. Wellington is the answer. But Maya delivered it like it was a fact she'd carried since birth. No second guessing. No faltering. And when Mr. Denton raised his eyebrow just slightly, she leaned forward and added, People always think it's Wellington, but Sydney's the political center. It's like how most people think New York is the capital of the U.S. Another student nodded. A few wrote it down. No one fact-checked her. Why would they? She sounded so certain. By the time her answer was corrected at the end of class, almost as an afterthought, no one seemed to notice or care. The idea had already spread, because certainty doesn't just land, it infects. Maya became a kind of myth in school. She always seemed to know things. Why people fall out of love, what causes recessions, how to tell when someone is lying. If you asked her about the stock market, she could explain it in metaphors. If you mentioned your ex, she'd analyze their childhood attachment style before you finished your sentence. It wasn't that she was always right. She wasn't. But she made you feel like she was. It wasn't until the senior showcase that anyone really questioned it. Each group was assigned a historical trial to reenact. Maya led hers like a general, outlining the arguments, assigning the parts, weaving the story. I've got the timeline memorized, she said. We'll hammer the emotion, then flip the jury with moral ambiguity. People nodded. They trusted her. The performance was dramatic, passionate, even moving. And then the judges gave them a C. The verdict was wrong. The key event had been flipped. The motivations, based on a common myth, not fact. Maya didn't argue. She just blinked, and for the first time, looked uncertain. Afterward, she sat backstage, alone, still in costume, still lit by the faint blue of the exit signs. She scrolled through her notes, found her original draft, cross-checked the dates, realized the mistake wasn't recent. It went all the way back to her first Google search, the one she skimmed and felt was enough. She never checked again, because she'd been so sure, and so had everyone else. People talk about liars, manipulators, gaslighters, But the mind plays a different trick entirely. It makes us confident, even in the absence of truth. And confidence? It's persuasive. It wears a halo, even when it's built on sand. In psychology, this is known as the overconfidence effect, the tendency to overestimate the accuracy of your knowledge, especially when you feel in control or socially validated. Maya didn't try to deceive anyone. She wasn't arrogant, but her brain filled in the blanks with certainty. And when you feel sure, you stop asking questions. You stop checking. You stop learning. There's a study where people are asked simple general knowledge questions. What's the distance from the Earth to the Moon? What's the population of France? Participants are told to give their answer, then rate how confident they are. Across the board, the numbers were wrong, but the confidence? Off the charts. And that gap between what we know and what we think we know is where poor decisions are born. It's where leaders go unchallenged, where lies feel like truths, where people follow voices that echo certainty over reason. Maya's confidence wasn't her fault. It was her brain doing what brains do, protecting the ego, building coherence, smoothing over cracks with conviction. And because she sounded right, others believed she was. That's the real danger. Because when confidence becomes louder than curiosity, we stop looking for what's real, and we start trusting the voice that feels the most familiar. Even if it's wrong, you don't have to be loud to be believed. You just have to sound sure. But truth doesn't always speak that way. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it asks questions. Maya learned that lesson the hard way, sitting in silence, backstage, for the first time in years. No one clapped. No one nodded. Just the echo of her own voice. And the creeping realization that certainty, unquestioned, is just another kind of illusion. But certainty has a cousin. It doesn't shout, and it doesn't lie, it whispers. It draws lines between dots that were never connected. It sketches meaning in chaos. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. That's what happened to Owen. Owen didn't believe in coincidences. He didn't start that way. He used to be normal, average, quiet. He worked in procurement for a mid-sized logistics company, where chaos meant a late shipment or a misplaced form. But he read an article one night, just one. A journalist had uncovered how a well-known social media platform was selling user location data to third-party firms, one of which had ties to a government agency Owen had never heard of. It wasn't front-page news, but it stuck with him, and that's where the pattern began. He started noticing things. Noticing how, whenever he searched for something niche like water filter cartridges, an ad would show up not just online, but on the bus stop across from his office. He noticed that his phone sometimes buzzed even when there were no notifications, like a phantom alert, a reminder, a trigger. He mentioned it to a coworker once, jokingly. Probably just the algorithm, they said. But that only made it worse. Because that word algorithm, it meant something. Something hidden. Something unknowable. Owen didn't sleep well for a while. He started taking notes. Not on a phone, not a computer. By hand. Spiral-bound notebooks filled with scribbled dates, times, moments that didn't line up. He made charts, graphs, maps. At first it was small things, ad placements, timed notifications. Then it became people. The woman in the corner apartment who always watered her plants at exactly 6:43 p.m. The man in the trench coat who took the same bus stop selfie every Tuesday. The number 7 started appearing everywhere. He found it on receipts, license plates, transaction IDs, even the number of steps between his desk and the break room. That's when he started pinning photos to the wall. It wasn't paranoia, not to him. It was clarity. Owen wasn't unraveling. He was decoding. Everyone else was sleepwalking through patterns too big to comprehend, but he was awake. He didn't trust Reddit, too obvious. But he found a forum, hidden behind 5 layers of broken link trails and archived blog rolls. There were others, people with names like Code Glitch, Rorschach, Returned, Half-Woken. They shared charts, articles, theories. Owen read them like scripture. It was comforting, addictive. Then came the signal. One night at 3:12 a.m., every light in his apartment flickered 3 times. No wind, no outage, no pattern, until he checked the building's power logs. Routine grid maintenance, the email said, but only his apartment had been listed. And that's when he became certain he'd seen too much. The 7S, the bus stop, the trench coat man. They weren't just patterns. They were warnings. He started talking less, stopped answering his family's texts. His boss called him in, concerned. Said Owen had started shipping items to duplicate addresses, that he wasn't present. Owen smiled and said everything was fine. And that night, he covered his laptop camera with tape. He kept seeing the number, on cereal boxes, on clocks, once on a pigeon's leg band. 7, 7, 7. That was the moment everything clicked. The moment the pattern finally connected. 7 wasn't the code. 7 was the reset. He wrote a letter, 1 page, folded it into a perfectly even square, and left it in his desk drawer. He removed the pins from the wall, tore the red thread down, burned the notebooks in a sink. The next morning, he packed 2 bags and vanished. No one has heard from him since. The letter simply read, "Once you see it, you can't go back, but you can disappear." You might say Owen lost his mind, but Owen would say he finally used it. And that's the tragedy of pattern recognition. The brain is designed to connect things even when the connections don't exist, especially when they don't. It's a phenomenon called apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaning in randomness. It's why we see faces in clouds, hear messages in static, find conspiracies in shadows. But it goes deeper. When a person starts with a belief, a suspicion, a fear, the brain starts selecting only the data that supports it. That's confirmation bias, the mental echo chamber that builds a castle out of sand. And when the world gets too chaotic, we want to believe there's an order behind it, even if it means we're being watched, even if it means we're being followed, even if it means we were never free. We crave patterns. We need them. They make the noise quieter. But the brain doesn't care if the pattern is true, only that it makes the chaos stop. Owen's mind didn't betray him with madness. It betrayed him with logic misused, unchecked, and weaponized by fear. He didn't get lost in the dark. He mapped it, but some disappear without ever leaving. They don't unravel in public or draw red thread across their walls. They get up, they go to work, they smile when they're supposed to, and behind one locked door they bury the part of themselves they don't know how to grieve. This is the story of Thomas Hay, and the room he never opened. Thomas's house was always clean, not just tidy, sterile. He vacuumed the floors in perfect, vertical lines. The pantry was alphabetized. Coffee mugs faced the same direction, with handles at 45-degree angles. There was a room at the end of the hall, plain white door, never opened. People assumed it was storage, but Thomas knew every item in his house. There was no storage, only containment. He worked in IT, remote support, rarely left the house. Once a week, he went to the grocery store. Same list, same aisle path, same self-checkout register. The neighbor said he was polite, quiet. One called him pleasant, in a tired sort of way. 5 years earlier, Thomas had a daughter, Emma, 7 years old, talkative, curious, wore the same polka dot rain boots every day, rain or shine. She died suddenly. A respiratory infection that turned aggressive in days. He and his wife never really recovered, but they grieved differently. She wept, screamed into pillows, dismantled Emma's room, piece by piece, until it was bare. Thomas never went inside. A month later, she left, not because she stopped loving him, but because he stopped feeling anything. He never yelled. He never cried. He never reacted. It was like talking to a photograph of someone you used to know. After she left, Thomas moved. Smaller place. No backyard, no echoes, and one room, at the end of the hall, with a plain white door. That's where he put it. All of it. Emma's blanket, her rain boots, the unopened school project she never got to present. He closed the door, locked it, and never went back in. He never used the word grief. He called it the event. He never said her name out loud again. Instead, he worked, replied to emails, watched procedural crime shows, read news headlines without clicking them. It became a ritual, a way to smooth the static, and every day he passed the door. His therapist, back when he still went, once told him, "Grief unexpressed doesn't disappear, it waits." Thomas disagreed. He believed emotions were like wires. If they short-circuited, you isolated them, pulled the fuse, shut them down. You didn't sit in the dark crying. You turned off the lights and learned to see in the dark. People thought he was stable. He wasn't reckless, didn't drink, didn't lash out. He was always calm, controlled. But that was the problem. There was no chaos, no fight, just silence. The brain is good at helping us survive. Too good. When pain becomes overwhelming, it compartmentalizes. It stores trauma in isolated corners, locks them down. This isn't strength. It's deferral. And eventually, the cost comes due. One morning, Thomas made coffee like usual, but he forgot to add water, then forgot to turn off the burner. He spilled a mug and just stood there, watching the steam rise, the smell of scorched grounds spreading through the kitchen. Something cracked, not loudly, just a hairline fracture, barely audible. That day, he didn't log into work. He stood in the hallway for hours, hand resting on the doorknob, breathing, not moving, just listening. He imagined what it would feel like to open it, what he'd see, what it would smell like, whether her blanket still held her shape. But he didn't turn the knob. He went back to the kitchen, cleaned the counter, refolded the dish rag. Saturday in silence until the sun went down. We talk about grief like a storm, loud, uncontrollable. But for some people, it's more like static. It doesn't crash. It accumulates. It's the weight of silence, the echo of shoes that no longer walk, the half-full drawers, the names you won't say. Psychologically, this is called emotional suppression, the conscious inhibition of feelings in order to maintain control. Over time, it becomes compartmentalization, boxing away trauma to function in daily life. Short term, it works. Long term, it erodes identity, because every part of you that stays locked away stops growing, stops breathing, and slowly calcifies into something you can't reach. Thomas wasn't getting by. He was disappearing, one quiet room at a time. People who suppress their emotions often don't realize they're doing it. It feels like discipline. It looks like strength. But neurologically, the brain is diverting cognitive resources away from emotional processing, suppressing activation in the amygdala, the region tied to fear and sadness, boosting the prefrontal cortex to keep everything orderly. The cost? Blunted affect, weakened empathy, emotional numbness. Thomas's grief didn't vanish. It crystallized, took root in that room. And every day he didn't open the door, he gave it power. We think locking something away protects us, but it doesn't. It preserves it, like a wound that never scabs. No one knows if Thomas ever opened the door, but the neighbors say that One morning, they saw him standing in the hall, hand on the knob, still, as if the decision was the only thing left in him. He stood there for almost an hour, and then the lights went out. We believe strength is silence, that to not break is to survive. But grief isn't a threat. It's an obligation, a debt the heart owes to what it loved. To lock it away is to pause the process, to hold your breath underwater, forever. Thomas didn't need to open the door. He just needed to let it breathe. But sometimes, the mind doesn't just lock the door. It deletes the hallway, paints over the map, not to hide the truth, but to protect the person carrying it. Clara was 6 when it happened, but she didn't remember a thing. Clara always said her childhood was uneventful. 2 parents, 1 dog, a little sister who copied everything she did. But the first 6 years of her life were a blur. She remembered her 2nd grade teacher, her friend Natalie who wore glitter shoes. But before that it was fog. No first day of school, no 5th birthday, no faces, no voice calling her name, just a blank page. She used to think that was normal. It wasn't until she turned 28 that it started to unravel. It happened in an antique store. She was browsing bored, killing time when she saw it. A small wooden box, worn, red velvet lining. The kind of thing someone might use to store letters or tiny keepsakes. Her hand hovered over it. She felt cold. She didn't open it. She left the store, felt nauseous the whole walk home. That night, she had a dream. She was in a hallway, dark wood paneling, yellow wallpaper, a closed door at the end. She was small, child height. Something was behind the door, breathing. She woke up crying. At first, she brushed it off. Stress, hormones, maybe a movie she didn't remember watching. But the dream came back. Different details. Same hallway. Sometimes the door was open. Sometimes she could hear footsteps. Then came the smell. A strange scent in her apartment one afternoon, like sawdust and bleach. No source. Just there. And gone. And then came the photo album. It was in a storage box at her mother's house. Clara hadn't opened it in years. She was visiting, helping clean out old things. Her mother handed her the album and said, "I think this was yours." Inside, a few newborn pictures. A toddler photo in a high chair. Then a 6-year gap. No birthdays. No first day of school. Nothing. Clara stared at the empty slots. The photos that should have been there. And the sudden, creeping pressure behind her eyes. Her mother noticed. "We lost some things in the move," she said, too quickly. That night, Clara went online. Typed in the words she'd never thought to search. Why don't I remember my early childhood? Blocked childhood memories trauma? Signs of repressed memory. The answers weren't comforting. The science was clear. Some memories aren't just forgotten. They're buried deep beneath the conscious mind. Sealed away to protect the self from harm too great to process. This is repression, not denial, not avoidance, but the subconscious removal of a memory too painful to hold. It often starts in childhood, when the brain is still forming, especially the hippocampus, which handles long-term memory. When traumatic events occur, the brain's fight-or-flight systems flood the body with stress hormones. Instead of encoding the experience, the brain dismembers it, tears it into fragments, shoves it into dark corners, and the conscious mind moves on, but the body never forgets. Clara started to notice things, words that made her flinch, familiar wallpaper in an old movie that made her heart race, a floorboard squeak that made her nauseous. She couldn't explain it. She didn't know what it meant, but her nervous system did. She started therapy. At first, she didn't bring it up. They talked about work, stress, family, surface-level things. Then one day, she mentioned the hallway, and the door, and the wooden box. Her therapist paused, asked, gently, "Did anything ever happen when you were small?" Something you've never been able to name? Um, Clara said no, but her hands were shaking. A few months later, during a session, she broke down. Something about the word storage. Her therapist had said it casually, in another context entirely, and Clara started sobbing, chest heaving, words tangled. She said, "He told me it was a game." She didn't know who he was, or where the words had come from, but she knew they were real, and she knew finally that there was something she hadn't forgotten, just something she had survived. Repressed memory recovery is fragile. It's controversial, easily misunderstood, but it happens. Not all at once. Not in a movie-style flashback. It returns in fragments. Smells, dreams, panic attacks without context, tears without reason. The mind brings it back when it's safe, when the architecture of the self is finally strong enough to hold the weight. Clara had never lied to herself. She had simply waited. One day, she went back to the antique shop. The box was still there. She bought it, took it home, opened it slowly. Inside, nothing, but her hands still trembled. It wasn't the object. It was the symbol, the access point. A month later, her mother called, sounding tired, hesitant. "I've been thinking," she said, "about when you were little. There's something I should have told you a long time ago." Clara closed her eyes and said, "I already know. The mind is not a vault. It's a house with hidden rooms. Some are locked because we aren't ready to enter them. But locked doesn't mean gone, and silence doesn't mean safety." Clara didn't forget because she was weak. She forgot because she was human, because her mind chose survival over memory. And when it was time, it let her back in. Memory lies, confidence misleads, patterns deceive, grief hides, and sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. The mind does all of this not to hurt us, but to protect us. But protection has a cost. And the deeper you go into the architecture of your own mind, the more you begin to wonder, what else have I forgotten? And what will I find when I finally remember?